everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Congressman Mike Levin. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me.
Always good to be with you, Brittany.
I'm always grateful for our conversations because you come on and provide your perspective on current events. Today's no different. I do want to talk about Iran because over the weekend, the United States and Israel launched joint wide-scale attacks against Iran, and Iran has responded with strikes of their own. They've retaliated on neighboring countries. This conflict has continued now in the following days. There's no clear end date in sight. But I first want to start off the conversation by defining exactly what these military actions are. Because when describing Operation Epic Fury, both President Donald Trump as well as War Secretary Pete Hegseth used the term war when talking about it. But on Wednesday, House Speaker Mike Johnson said this, quote, "We're not at war right now. We're 4 days into a very specific, clear mission and operation." What do you say? Are we at war right now with Iran?
Donald Trump says war, Pete Hegseth says war, and Marco Rubio says war. They've all said that multiple times. And if they say it, it's a war. And at the same time, you have members of Congress on the Republican side, apologists for Trump, unwilling to stand up for the Constitution, unwilling to stand up for war powers belonging to the Congress pursuant to Article 1. They're saying anything that they can to try to justify being ignored, being avoided as Congress. And so to hear Mike Johnson or to hear any of the members of the House or Senate on the Republican side call it anything other than it is, which is war, really is just another example of them undermining their own power, their own influence. And it's why when you and I have spoken before, Brittany, I've referred to Mike Johnson as the deputy speaker. Donald Trump is in charge. Donald Trump's in charge of the House Republicans, of the Senate Republicans, of the Republican National Committee, of the whole operation. And he has completely turned his back on the law and the Constitution with regard to the strikes on Iran. And I think anybody that's just willing to look at it objectively, not wearing a MAGA hat, understands that's the case.
I'm really curious why there is this real contention using the word war, because I had a conversation earlier this week with Congressman Tim Burchett. I always appreciate our conversations, but he made it a point to say we are not at war with Iran. And when I asked about the definition of war, he was saying we're in a fight with the regime, with their leadership, not with the Iranian people themselves. But why is there such a disagreement on this term?
Well, Tim is my friend, and I didn't hear what Tim said, but I can just tell you that the War Powers Act is really clear from 1973, that if you have major combat operations, sustained combat operations, and you're doing it not in immediate self-defense, if there's no imminent threat to Americans at home or abroad, that is very specific and actionable, that you need Congress. You need Congress. You can't just unilaterally go it alone as the president. And that's been the law since 1973. Now, we can take exception with what other presidents may or may not have done. And since I've been in Congress in 2019, Brittany, I will tell you we've had nothing like this. You had Joe Biden that engaged in a series of very narrow and retaliatory strikes against terrorists or against others that had already been authorized pursuant to an AUMF, an authorization for use of military force. That's what's required when you want to go to war. That's what George W. Bush, if you go back to the to the post 9/11 period, that's what he got to be able to go after Al Qaeda in the wake of 9/11. And ever since, you've had Republican and Democratic administrations lean on that authorization for use of force. It doesn't apply here. I've seen some in MAGA world try to allege that it applies to Iran. It doesn't. It was very specifically focused on Al Qaeda and those involved in the 9/11 attacks. So I think you have my Republican friends trying to shoehorn the administration's illegal and unconstitutional actions into whatever framework they can devise to try to justify the inaction of Congress during this extremely important time. And look, there are real world consequences of these actions, of the lack of planning and preparation. There are already 6 American service members who have died. There are literally billions and billions of dollars being spent, something like another $1 billion every day. And of course, at the same time, Republicans are saying we don't have money for health care for people, but evidently we've got money for $1 billion war every single day. So there is just a disconnect here, Brittany. This is not what the president ran on. This is not what America First was supposed to be. And of course, there are so many Americans who are stuck over there in the Middle East right now who can't get out. And there was really no forethought or planning to get them out. The president came and spoke to the nation, spoke to the Congress just days before launching the strike from his golf resort in Florida. It's just, the whole thing is just beyond anything I have witnessed during my time in Congress, or really beyond anything that we've seen in modern American history.
There's been a lot of questions here on the strategy and the timeline, and even if Iran posed an immediate threat to the United States. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that Iran did. He said this, quote, "We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces." But then President Trump on Tuesday was asked this: did Israel force your hand to launch these strikes against Iran? Did Netanyahu pull the United States into this war? And then President Trump answered, "No, I might have forced their hand. You see, we were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first." Based on what you know as a member of Congress, did Iran pose an imminent threat, and what do you make about that question on Israel?
Well, basically the administration comes up with a different story every day, in the days since they launched the attack, and they have lacked a consistent or coherent strategy or end game. And that's deeply disconcerting for people like me that represent so many members of our military and their families. What I will tell you is the world is better off without a nuclear-armed Iran, and we strongly support Iranians' desire to have democracy. But that doesn't mean that we should go and seek regime change. It doesn't mean that we should have launched a unilateral attack. Obviously the president did not feel necessary to consult with Congress to get the sign-off of Congress. He just decided to go and act. Maybe he felt emboldened or empowered by the actions in Venezuela. Maybe he feels he's just invincible or indestructible. I really don't know, Brittany, but what I do know is that because of the lack of planning, we've got many Americans who are stuck in the Middle East right now. We've got 6 American service members who have already died. And the president, in a cavalier way, says, well, maybe we'll wind up with somebody just as bad in Iran in 5 years from now. Saying also the people that he had thought would replace the Ayatollah, well, they all died too. So, and now he says that the Ayatollah's son is a lightweight. He's going to choose who the next leader of Iran is going to be. I think there's just a fundamental lack of history, a fundamental lack of context. This is not the first time that there has been discussion about military action in Iran. We've been briefed on it as members of Congress, the pros and cons, for my time in the Congress in 9 years or 8 years, and it's always been that the cons significantly outweigh the pros. If you open up Pandora's box and you lead to a broader regional conflict that further involves American men and women who are serving overseas, that's something that I don't think the American people have bargained for. And I think the president, when he ran, he said we were going to end these forever wars. Instead, he may be starting a brand new one. And that's deeply, deeply antithetical to what MAGA was supposed to be about in the first place.
I want to talk about that timeline and see if you have any insight on it, because it remains a little vague. President Trump initially said this could be 4 to 5 weeks, but we're moving ahead of schedule. But then he posted this later in the week. He said this was a post about the U.S. munition stockpile, and it read in part this: "As was stated to me today, we have a virtually unlimited supply of these weapons. Wars can be fought forever and very successfully using just these supplies, which are better than other countries' finest arms." Does that signal to you anything about the timeline? I mean, people were really scared about another endless war, another forever war in the Middle East. President Trump said right there, we have enough in our stockpile to have a forever war.
What scares me, Brittany, is that they're making it up as they go along. We are witnessing the whims of the President of the United States dictate our day-to-day foreign policy without a clear and coherent strategy or endgame. I also have no confidence whatsoever in Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense. I feel that he should not be making decisions that involve life or death, and I don't feel he should be Secretary at all. I have a lot more respect for Marco Rubio and for General Kane. And I just hope that as these decisions are made, as the strategy is fleshed out, that the president will listen to General Kane and will listen to Secretary Rubio and not Pete Hegseth, who is unqualified. I don't think Pete Hegseth is qualified to do very much of anything, to be honest with you.
What do you think the objectives and strategies are here? Because a bunch have been listed out since Saturday. President Trump initially, when he was announcing Operation Epic Fury, told the Iranian people, once the bombs stop dropping, go and take over your government. Pete Hegseth then said this is not a regime change war. Then President Trump listed out these objectives: destroy Iran's missile capabilities and their navy, ensure they can never get a nuke, and also prohibit the regime from funding any terrorist proxy groups. But then Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he seemed really annoyed with reporters when they were asking, hey, what are the objectives here? He didn't understand how it wasn't clear, and this is what he said. The United States is conducting an operation to eliminate the threat of Iran's short-range ballistic missiles and the threat posed by their navy, particularly to naval assets. I mean, I've been covering Iran for a long time, and this week's the first time I've heard about, the Navy being such a threat that this action, that is the goal of the operation here. As a member of Congress, do you think the strategy is well defined at all?
No. And they didn't brief us. That's the whole point. The last we were told as members of Congress prior to the attack was that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were still attempting to negotiate a deal, and they were continuing to try to exercise diplomacy. And then the State of the Union happened, and I went back, Brittany, and I looked at the piece of the State of the Union on Iran, and it was a far cry from what wound up happening just, 4 days after, 3 or 4 days after, which was a full-scale attack. It obviously was a hastily made decision. Otherwise, why were there no plans in place to evacuate American men and women who were stuck, and many are still stuck, in the Middle East, can't get out? Why was there no forethought around those Americans? And, the hypocrisy is really something when you think of it, Brittany, because the president said during the State of the Union, he made a big show to say, if you think that our first priority should be American citizens, then stand up. Well, what about those American citizens that are trapped right now overseas? What about those American citizens who are being put in harm's way for an unclear mission with no endgame? It's hardly America first, if you ask me.
You did mention the State of the Union, and I do want to use that as a segue to my next part of the conversation, because President Trump made history in that speech. His first State of the Union of his second term, the longest one, an hour and 48 minutes. And in those hour and 48 minutes, he only spoke about Iran for a few of them. And so if you're a betting person, you're listening to this speech, didn't exactly probably occur to you that a strike against Iran was imminent. However, some bets placed on Polymarket before the strike, they're under a lot of scrutiny because some people made a lot of money betting that the United States would strike Iran. And for those who don't know, Polymarket is one of the biggest prediction markets. People can place bets on there for different current events and bet on the outcomes of them. One Polymarket user by the name MAGA My Man made over $500,000 on suspiciously timed bets on the Iran strike, as well as that the supreme leader would be out of power. The New York Times reported that they analyzed Polymarket data, and they found it was, quote, relatively uncommon for someone to put a lot of money down on a strike, and that strike would be happening the next day. But on Friday, the outlet found this, quote, more than 150 accounts placed hundreds of bets of at least $1,000, correctly predicting an American strike on Iran by Saturday. Then the blockchain analytics tool Bubble Maps found 6 Polymarket accounts, most of which they said were made within the last 24 hours, made $1.2 million in total on bets placed just hours before the strike that it would happen on Saturday. What do you make of all these bets?
Well, it's deeply, deeply immoral to be profiteering off war and off death. War is not a casino. This is not in any way, shape, or form appropriate, and it really needs to be illegal. And if you take a look at the laws, because as a result of this, I looked at the laws that were on the books. I looked at the regulations that are supposed to be there. And a lot of it comes down to the CFTC needing to set these guardrails in place for the polymarkets of the world. And as you probably remember, CFTC was really gutted by Doge. Doge went after CFTC, and of course they're hamstrung to be able to regulate as it is, and now have even fewer resources. So they were supposed to come out with some guardrails on this, and they haven't. And in the absence of CFTC being able to do its job, Congress needs to step up and I believe create a statutory framework in the absence of any kind of regulatory framework to say very clearly and unequivocally that you should not be allowed to bet on war or death. And what you've got right now is a loophole. They're using a loophole because they call these regime change markets, Brittany. So they say, for example, you're betting on whether the Ayatollah would still be in power, not whether he'd be alive or dead. But in my view, it's a distinction without a moral difference, and it needs to be banned permanently. So I am working on legislation right now, actually with a number of senators and others who are very interested in this. And I think there is a window. You know, it's not just a messaging exercise. I think there legitimately is a window to try to crack down on this, because it's morally reprehensible. The other thing is we ought to track down who actually placed these bets. And I'm no expert, but my hope is that enough forensic analysis can be done to get at who may have done this, and whether they were Americans or not. Were they involved in these military operations? If so, is there criminal liability for having misused their position or their knowledge in this manner?
I think that this issue is twofold, right? One, to your point earlier, that betting on war, I mean, that is some really sinister stuff, really sinister way to make money. The second is the question of insider trading. And last Friday, the day before the strike, I had a Middle East expert on, and he was talking about what he thought was next. It was the day after the third round of negotiations between U.S. and Iranian officials resulted in no nuclear deal. And I asked, is diplomacy going to work, do you think, or do you think there's going to be strikes? And he said that he thought there were going to be strikes, and he said the U.S. is clearly preparing to strike, but not only to strike in a limited way, but for an elongated campaign. Do you think that these bets were made by someone who was listening to experts or reading the news, or do you think that this smells like insider trading because of how big they were and because of the timing?
We don't know, Brittany. I do know that the CFTC was conducting an investigation into Polymarket, the DOJ also. That was before Donald Trump took office the second time, and the CFTC and DOJ basically dropped those investigations into the insider trading, the sort of which you're discussing, or the potential insider trading, the sort of which you're discussing. And right around that same time, Donald Trump Jr. wound up on the Polymarket Advisory Board. So they dropped the investigations. They clearly don't have any interest in transparency or accountability. But we know that sunlight from the public and from reporting is still helpful, because they, believe it or not, the other day they had bets that you could place on whether there was going to be nuclear war. And as a result, I think they've taken those bets down as a result of some of the outcry on social media and in the mainstream press. So we're going to continue to push them. We're going to continue to investigate. We have to get to the bottom of exactly who profited from the news or potentially before the news of the Iran invasion, before that broke. It's just fundamentally wrong. And as you may remember, Brittany, I've been doing everything possible to try to crack down on insider trading for members of Congress. And, you know, that's really compared to trading on war. None of it is good, but I think trading on war is probably the most egregious of them all.
And is there anything that Congress can do to figure out who these people are? I mean, the one account alone, MAGA My Man, like I said, made over $500,000 on these well-timed bets. I mean, is there any investigation you guys can lead to figure out who this is, and if they were people who had information beforehand?
Well, I'll talk to my colleagues in the relevant committees to see what investigative opportunities may exist in the House. I suspect with Republicans in charge, they're not so eager to investigate Polymarket, particularly with Don Jr. on the board, on the advisory board. But I think the CFTC really is the regulatory entity with the jurisdiction to investigate. At least they're supposed to, and we're going to call on them to do that. Beyond that, what I've been told by people who have some expertise in forensic analysis of crypto markets and such is that it's very difficult, but not impossible, to determine who placed these bets. And we're gonna continue to follow through on this.
Congressman Levin, I always appreciate our conversations. Thank you so much for the time. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you, Brittany. I hope the next time we speak, it's a more peaceful time than we have right now, but I appreciate all you do.